One of the biggest downfalls of an entry-level bike is the suspension. It's soft, yet springy, and depending on how you ride, can be borderline dangerous. Apart from that, these CRF250Fs do amazing on the trails, and at almost half of the cost of a modern high-performance dirt bike, they are a really good value. I'm Tanner, you're watching Adventure Daily, and in today's video, we're gonna be turning this budget-friendly bike into a hard enduro capable machine. First and foremost, I gotta give a huge shout out to Bruce Triplett. He's been turning mediocre suspension into works of art for the past 30 years, and he is a master at unlocking the true potential of these Honda trail bikes. Be sure to check out his website or give him a phone call if interested. Tell him that Tanner at Adventure Daily sent you. So what we have here is the complete suspension upgrade kit. In the rear, we have a fully adjustable Hagon shock that is sprung for Alexis and I's weight. Yes, we are upgrading both bikes. With the stock shock from Honda, you get what you get, and other than a little bit of sag adjustment, it really just sucks for any weight. The Hagon gives you 5 full turns of rebound adjustment and internal components that aren't made of Chinesium. Moving to the front of the bike, this is where Bruce works his magic. So the stock setup has little to no damping. He actually takes out the factory damper rods and modifies them to create a progressive style of damping. Now this bike wasn't meant to be sent off of 80-foot doubles, but coupled with the heavier fork springs that he offers, you will be able to attack the gnarlier stuff with confidence. I'm also going to be installing a set of Bruce's patented flute extenders, which lengthens the travel of the fork quite a bit and actually raises the ride height a little. So that's it as far as the components. Let's get right into the install. To sum things up quickly, you're gonna need to take the seat off, the plastics, loosen the battery box, remove the shock, install the Hagon, leave everything hand tight so you can adjust the sag later. Up front, remove the wheel, the caliper, and be sure to crack the Allens loose before sliding the forks out. Now we are ready to jump inside. Remove the caps, drain the oil, keep notes on the order of everything, swap the rings over to the new rods, slide everything back in, check the sag, and torque it down. If you were able to retain all of that, respect to you, but let's slow things down and walk you through the entire process. Now the rear shock is pretty straightforward. You're just taking the old one out and putting the new one in. But this bike was never intended to have adjustable suspension, so it's pretty hard to get to. There are 2 10mm bolts buried in the battery box that you'll need to take out so you can gain access to the upper shock mount. You obviously want to have the bike on a stand to get the weight off of the shock for removal. Bone dry. Oh yeah, she plumb seized. Success. Alexis's bike had a needle bearing that was absolutely clapped, and the longer we have owned this bike, the more I think it was used as a freaking submarine. A little crusty. She's clapped. I actually had to remove and polish each individual needle to remove all of the corrosion, but in the end I was able to salvage the bearing and greased every other part of the linkage while I was in here. You can also wait until after you adjust the sag because you will have to take the shock out again and it might get a little bit messy. Although you could get lucky and fall into that 70mm range, but more on setting the sag later. One thing I'll note while we're here, you will not be able to reuse the extended clevis from Hyperlite as it won't work with the Hagon shock. But you can still run the Corona linkage, which gives you the adjustable ride height and offers a full inch lift or lower if you're on the shorter side. Every product you see in this video will be linked down in the description. It's the same process in reverse to install the Hagon shock. Although be sure to have it oriented to where the rebound adjuster faces the exhaust side so you can actually have access to it. As mentioned before, leave everything hand tight so you can set the sag later. While the front forks have a little bit more going on, there's actually less moving parts than you would think, and everything's easily accessible for a more enjoyable install. Now before removing the forks, be sure to break the Allens loose on the bottom of the fork legs. These are actually what hold your damping rods in place. You may have to use some heat, but only back them off a turn of the ratchet for now. First things first, we're going to remove the front wheel, followed by the brake caliper and brake hose bracket. On the opposite end of the forks, you're going to want to loosen the caps, followed by the pinch bolts on the triple clamps, and slide the forks out the bottom. Find a bucket because the next thing we're going to do is drain the fluid. If you want to drain first without removing anything like I did, keep a finger over the lip to keep the innards from falling out and let it drain to a slow drip. Yummy.
Yeah, I don't think it's supposed to look like that.
Nope.
How does it get so dirty?
It shouldn't be a surprise at this point, but the fluid in her forks were absolutely disgusting. For a 2020, this thing has to have some hours on it. Now keep the forks over the bucket while sliding out all the components, as they will still have a lot of oil on them. First thing to come out is the top spacer, followed by a washer, then the spring is the last to come out before we remove the damping rods. That's how it should look. Now something that Bruce came up with that is very helpful is to get a 3-foot section of 1/4-20, put a little 90-degree bend in the end about 2 inches long, so you can actually put that through the hole in the bottom of the fork leg to keep everything aligned. You can also use a dowel rod, a twig if you're out in the woods, or just anything that you can fit up through that bottom hole, preferably on the smoother side. Now in the bottom of the fork legs, there's this little oil retainer or spacer that can get flipped around when you undo those bolts. Now I shook it around a little bit to try to replicate that, and I couldn't get it to move, but apparently this has happened to other people, and this method prevents that from happening. It just really helps to line everything up, especially if you're going to use the flute extenders. After your rod is inserted, flip the fork over and the stock damper rod assembly will slide out. Underneath the collar of the damper rod is a small spring, and that, my friends, is what a cheap Brazilian fork consists of. So I had to get heavier fork springs for my weight. I'm around 200 pounds right now, closer to 225 with gear. Alexis, on the other hand, was able to use the factory springs because she's the size of a malnourished dwarf. That being said, take some time to clean up the components that are going to be going back in the fork, and it's time for reassembly. You will need to reuse what Bruce refers to as the piston ring on the damping rod, so swap that over. It's a lot easier than I was expecting. He also suggests to super glue the flute extenders, if you have them, to the damper rod for an easier install, but I found with that guide rod in there, it just wasn't necessary. So drop in the flute extender, that smaller spring, followed by the damper rod. If you are using the heavier springs, they will actually replace that thin, long top spacer. So that just leaves us with the washer, and we are ready to slide the guide rod out and install the extended Allen bolts. Now you will need some pressure on the spring to get the bolt to tighten. We'll torque it to spec once it's back in the bike, but be sure to dab some medium strength Loctite on them because the torque spec is pretty low. Now it's time to add some fluid. I haven't done much suspension work in the past, so I was surprised yet excited to see that Bruce recommended the use of a full synthetic automotive oil. It's a lot cheaper than a labeled fork oil, and at the end of the day, it does the same thing. Just make sure that you use the weight that he recommends. In my bike, he called for 605 cc's of 10W30 in each fork, and on Alexis's bike, 605 cc's of 5W20 in each fork. I used an old ratio right that I had lying around to get a somewhat accurate measurement. Thread the fork caps back on, and that is it. You have successfully transformed your bike's suspension from clapped to capable. When reinstalling the forks, be sure to match the height on both sides. You can use a set of calipers or just an eyeball if you're like me. Torque those bottom Allens now so you do not forget. They are very easy to over tighten, so the spec that Bruce recommends is around 5 to 7 foot-pounds. Now it is time to set the sag, and it's really going to be helpful to have an extra set of hands for this and a proper slack tool that we will have linked in the description.
We both ride with a variety of different gear, including hydration packs, tank bags, etc. But we wanted to just get somewhere in the ballpark range, so we used Tanner's hiking bag that weighs approximately 30 pounds or so.
The first measurement will be with your bike on a stand, unweighted, and you want a consistent measurement. So pick a spot in the middle or on top of the rear axle and then on the rear fender. Bruce recommends using a straight edge for this, but I highly recommend just buying a cheap sag ruler from Tusk. You will get a far more accurate measurement than like we did with a traditional tape measure. So once you have your marks picked out, take your measurement in millimeters, and now you are ready to get the bike off of the stand and hop on fully geared up for the next measurement. Bounce the suspension a few times, let it settle, and sit yourself in a neutral position. Have your partner take the same measurement that we did on the marks before. Now take this number, subtract it from the first number, and you have your rider or race sag. Now for this setup, you want to get around 70 millimeters, give or take a few. In my case, we were around 78, so we needed to tighten the spring up a few rotations. Bruce said that one full rotation equaled about 1.5 millimeters, and we found that that was a little bit inaccurate. It is pretty inconvenient that you have to take the shock out to do this. You just can't get that tool in there. The bike was never designed to have an adjustable shock, so that is no fault of the Hagon. That is just the nature of the bike. Victory! So we ended up taking out my shock around 3 times to get it right where I wanted it to be, and it ended up being around 68 millimeters, which is fine because I think I'll probably have a little bit more weight than what I did even with that backpack. So I was really just trying to get into that ballpark because I do ride with so many different gear and camera, accessories, camping equipment. So just trying to get in the ballpark, that was my only concern.
After so many tries of taking the shock in and out, I think we got it down to about 3 minutes of putting it back in and out again.
Oh, we were cruising.
Yeah.
It was like a NASCAR pit crew, man. We're like, nee. Almost broke her hand one time. Don't let that swing arm drop, guys. She had her hand in there, and it actually fell off of a prop that I had and almost crunched her hand, so be careful. At this point in the video, you have seen everything done once, so that's gonna wrap up the install. I really hope that this helps some of you out, and I highly encourage you do this to your bike. This was one of the last things that we needed to do before we headed out west as well, so we're gonna be hitting the road soon. And it's actually somebody's birthday today. So everybody wish Alexis a happy birthday. What do you want for your birthday, Alex?
I think it would be the best present if everyone headed over to ADV Daily Co. and grabbed themselves some official merch.
Woo! There we go. You heard it here, guys. I'll have the link in the description, as well as everything, all the other products. Once again, big thank you to Bruce Triplett. He is the man, the myth, the legend. He was awesome to work with. You can call him literally 7 days a week from noon until midnight, and he will pick up. I think the latest I called him, it was like 10:30. I don't encourage you to do that, but I was in the middle of filming the video. I just had some last minute questions, and he gladly answered them. So it's been a pleasure, Bruce. Thank you much.
We are super excited to ride these bikes.
You have no idea. You have no idea.
It's been killing us because the weather's actually been decent here, but...
Yeah, it was like 70 degrees the other day, and I was like, nope, I'm not riding it until we get out west. So that is the plan. I can't wait to get out to the gnarly stuff and really put a beating on these bikes, because man, that was just the icing on the cake. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you watching. We're gonna have some awesome content to come, from tutorials, gear reviews, camping, adventuring, and of course, riding. We're looking forward to doing a lot of riding, so make sure you have those notifications on. Subscribe if you're new. The next time you see us, we'll be surrounded by sand.
So be sure to live free and adventure daily.